This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Annie Coleman in St. Louis, Missouri, in July 2006. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 38. Making them pens was a distressed tough job, and so was the saw, and Jim allowed the inscription was going to be the toughest of all. That's the one which the prisoner has to scrabble on the wall. But he had to have it. Tom said he'd got to. There weren't no case of a state prisoner not scrabbling his inscription to leave behind, and his coat of arms. "Look at Lady Jane Grey," he says. "Look at Guilford Dudley. Look at old Northumberland. Why, Huck, suppose it is considerable trouble. What you going to do? How you going to get around it? Jim's got to do his inscription and coat of arms. They all do." Jim says, "Why, Mars Tom, I hain't got no coat of arm. I hain't got nothing but dish yere old shirt, and you knows I got to keep the journal on dat." "Oh, you don't understand, Jim. A coat of arms is very different." "Well," I says, "Jim's right anyway when he says he ain't got no coat of arms, because he hain't." "I reckon I knowed that," Tom says, "but you bet he'll have one before he gets out of this, because he's going out right, and there ain't going to be no flaws in his record." So, whilst me and Jim filed away at the pens on a brickbat apiece, Jim a-making his'n out of the brass and I making mine out of the spoon, Tom set to work to think out the coat of arms. By and by, he said he'd struck so many good ones he didn't hardly know which to take, but there was one which he reckoned he'd decide on. He says, "On the sketchin' we'll have a bend or in the dexter base, a saltire Murray in the fess with a dog, couchant for common charge, and under his foot a chain embattled for slavery, with a chevron vert and a chief engrailed, and 3 invected lines on a field azure, with the nombral points rampant on a dancet indented, crest, a runaway nigger, sable, with his bundle over his shoulder on a bar sinister, and a couple of ghouls for supporters, which is you and me. Motto, Maggiora fretta, minora atto. Got it out of a book. Means the more haste, the less speed." "Gee willikins," I says, "but what does the rest of it mean?" "We ain't got no time to bother over that," he says. "We got to dig in like all get out." "Well, anyway," I says, "what's some of it? What's a fess?" "A fess? A fess is—" "You don't need to know what a fess is. I'll show him how to make it when he gets to it." "Shucks, Tom," I says, "I think you might tell a person. What's a bar sinister?" "Oh, I don't know, but he's got to have it. All the nobility does." That was just his way. If it didn't suit him to explain a thing to you, he wouldn't do it. You might pump at him a week, it wouldn't make no difference. He'd got all that coat of arms business fixed, so now he started in to finish up the rest of that part of the work, which was to plan out a mournful inscription. Said Jim got to have one, like they all done. He made up a lot, and wrote them out on a paper and read them off so. 1. Here a captive heart busted. 2. Here a poor prisoner, forsook by the world and friends, fretted his sorrowful life. 3. Here a lonely heart broke, and a worn spirit went to its rest after 37 years of solitary captivity. 4. Here, homeless and friendless, after 37 years of bitter captivity, perished a noble stranger, natural son of Louis XIV. Tom's voice trembled whilst he was reading them, and he most broke down. When he got done, he couldn't no way make up his mind which one for Jim to scrabble onto the wall, they was all so good, but at last he allowed he would let him scrabble them all on. Jim said it would take him a year to scrabble such a lot of truck onto the logs with a nail, and he didn't know how to make letters besides. But Tom said he would block them out for him, and then he wouldn't have nothing to do but just follow the lines. Then pretty soon he says, "Come to think, The logs ain't a-goin' to do. They don't have log walls in a dungeon. We got to dig the inscriptions into a rock. We'll fetch a rock." Jim said the rock was worse than the logs. He said it would take him such a pissin' long time to dig them into a rock he wouldn't ever get out. But Tom said he would let me help him do it. Then he took a look to see how me and Jim was getting along with the pens. It was most pesky tedious hard work and slow, and didn't give my hands no show to get well of the sores, and we didn't seem to make no headway hardly. So Tom says, "I know how to fix it. We got to have a rock for the coat of arms and mournful inscriptions, and we can kill 2 birds with that same rock. There's a gaudy big grindstone down at the mill, and we'll smouch it and carve the things on it and file out the pens and the saw on it too." It warn't no slouch of an idea, and it warn't no slouch of a grindstone nuther, but we'd allowed we'd tackle it. It warn't quite midnight yet, so we cleared out for the mill, leaving Jim at work. We smouched the grindstone and set out to roll her home, but it was a most nation tough job. Sometimes, do what we couldn't keep her from falling over, and she come mighty near mashing us every time. Tom said she was going to get one of us, sure, before we got through. We got her halfway, and then we was plumb played out, and most drownded with sweat. We see it warn't no use. We got to go and fetch Jim. So he raised up his bed and slid the chain off of the bed leg and wrapped it around and round his neck, and we crawled out through our hole and down there, and Jim and me laid into that grindstone and walked her along like nothing, and Tom superintended. He could out-superintend any boy I ever see. He knowed how to do everything. Our hole was pretty big, but it warn't big enough to get the grindstone through. But Jim, he took the pick and soon made it big enough. Then Tom marked out them things in it with a nail and set Jim to work on them, with the nail for a chisel and an iron bolt from the rubbage in the lean-to for a hammer, and told him to work till the rest of his candle quit on him, and then he could go to bed and hide the grindstone under his straw tick and sleep on it. Then we helped him fix his chain back on the bed leg and was ready for bed ourselves. But Tom thought of something and says, "You got any spiders in here, Jim?" "No, sah, thanks to goodness I hain't, Marse Tom." "All right, we'll get you some." "But bless you, honey, I don't want none. I's afeared of 'em. I should as soon have rattlesnakes around." Tom thought a minute or two and says, "It's a good idea, and I reckon it's been done. It must have been done, it stands to reason. Yes, it's a prime good idea. Where could you keep it?" "Keep what, Marse Tom?" "Why, a rattlesnake." "To goodness gracious alive, Marse Tom. Why, if dey was a rattlesnake to come in here, I'd take and bust right out through dat log wall, I would, with my head." "Why, Jim, you wouldn't be afraid of it after a little. You could tame it." "Tame it?" "Yes, easy enough. Every animal is grateful for kindness and petting, and they wouldn't think of hurting a person that pets them. Any book will tell you that. You try, that's all I ask. Just try for 2 or 3 days. Why, you can get him so in a little while that he'll love you and sleep with you and won't stay away from you a minute, and will let you wrap him round your neck and put his head in your mouth. Please, Mars Tom, don't talk so. I can't stand it. He let me shove his head in my mouth for a favor, hain't it? I lay he'd wait a powerful long time 'fore I asked him. And more'n dat, I don't want him to sleep with me." "Jim, don't act so foolish. A prisoner's got to have some kind of a dumb pet, and if a rattlesnake hain't ever been tried, why, there's more glory to be gained in your being the first to ever try it than any other way you could ever think of to save your life." "Why, Mars Tom, I don't want no such glory. Snake take and bite Jim's chin off. Then what is the glory? No, sir, I don't want no such doings." "Blame it, can't you try? I only want you to try. You needn't keep it up if it don't work." "But the trouble all done if the snake bite me while I's a-trying him. Mars Tom, I's willing to tackle most anything 'at ain't unreasonable, but if you and Huck fetches a rattlesnake in here for me to tame, I's gwine to leave, that's sure." "Well, then let it go. Let it go if you're so bullheaded about it. We can get you some garter snakes, and you can tie some buttons on their tails and let on the rattlesnakes, and I reckon that'll have to do." "I can stand dem, Marse Tom, but blame if I couldn't get along without 'em, I tell you dat. I never knowed before 'twas so much bother and trouble to be a prisoner." "Well, it always is when it's done right. You got any rats around here?" "No, sah, I hain't seed none." "Well, we'll get you some rats." "Why, Marse Tom, I don't want no rats. Dey's the dab-blamedest creatures disturb a body and rustle round over him and bite his feet when he's trying to sleep I ever see. No, sir, gimme garter snakes if I's got to have 'em, but don't gimme no rats. I hain't got no use for 'em, scasely." "But, Jim, you got to have 'em. They all do. So don't make no more fuss about it. Prisoners ain't ever without rats. There ain't no instance of it. And they train them and pet them and learn them tricks, and they get to be as sociable as flies. But you got to play music to them. You got anything to play music on?" "I ain't got nothing but a coast comb and a piece of paper and a juice harp, but I reckon they wouldn't take no such stock in a juice harp." "Yes, they would. They don't care what kind of music 'tis. A juice harp's plenty good enough for a rat. All animals like music. In a prison they dote on it. 'Specially painful music, and you can't get no other kind out of a Jew's harp. It always interests them. They come out to see what's the matter with you. Yes, you're all right. You're fixed very well. You want to sit on your bed nights before you go to sleep and early in the mornings and play your Jew's harp. Play 'The Last Link is Broken.' That's the thing that'll scoop a rat quicker'n anything else. When you've played about 2 minutes you'll see all the rats and the snakes and spiders and things begin to feel worried about you and come, and they'll just fairly swarm over you and have a noble good time." "Yes, dey will, I reckon, Marse Tom. But what kinder time is Jim havin'? Bless if I can see de point. But I'll do it if I got to. I reckon I better keep de animals satisfied and not have no trouble in de house." Tom waited to think it over and see if there warn't nothing else, and pretty soon he says, "Oh, there's one thing I forgot. Could you raise a flower here, do you reckon?" "I don't know, but maybe I could, Marse Tom. But it's tolerable dark in here, and I ain't got no use for no flower, nohow, and she'd be a powerful sight of trouble." "Well, you try it anyway. Some other prisoners has done it." "One of dem big cat-tail-looking mullein stalks would grow in here, Marse Tom, I reckon, but she wouldn't be worth half the trouble she'd cost." "Don't you believe it. We'll fetch you a little one, and you plant it in the corner over there and raise it. And don't call it mullein, call it pitchiola. That's its right name when it's in a prison. And you want to water it with your tears." "Why, I got plenty spring water, Marse Tom." "You don't want spring water. You want to water it with your tears. It's the way they always do." "Why, Marse Tom, I lay I can raise one of dem mullein stalks twice with spring water, whiles another man's a-startin' one with tears." "That ain't the idea. You got to do it with tears." "She'll die on my hands, Marse Tom. She surely will, 'cause I don't scasely ever cry." So Tom was stumped, but he studied it over and then said Jim would have to worry along the best he could with an onion. He promised he would go to the nigger cabins and drop one, private, in Jim's coffee pot in the morning. Jim said he would just as soon have tobacco in his coffee, and found so much fault with it, and with the work and bother of raising the mullein, and Jew's harping the rats, and petting and flattering up the snakes and spiders and things, on top of all the other work he had to do on pens and inscriptions and journals and things, which made it more trouble and worry and responsibility to be a prisoner than anything he ever undertook, that Tom most lost all patience with him, and said he was just loading down with more gaudier chances than a prisoner ever had in the world to make a name for himself, and yet he didn't know enough to appreciate them, and they was just about wasted on him. So Jim, he was sorry, and said he wouldn't behave so no more, and then me and Tom shoved for bed. End of chapter 38. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Annie Coleman in St. Louis, Missouri, in July 2006. The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 39. In the morning, we went up to the village and bought a wire rat trap and fetched it down and unstopped the best rat hole, and in about an hour we had 15 of the bulliest kind of ones, and then we took it and put it in a safe place under Aunt Sally's bed. But while we was gone for spiders, little Thomas Franklin Benjamin Jefferson Alexander Phelps found it there and opened the door of it to see if the rats would come out, and they did, and Aunt Sally she come in, and when we got back she was a-standing on top of the bed, raising Cain, and the rats was doing what they could to keep off the dull times for her. So she took and dusted us both with the hickory, and we was as much as 2 hours catching another 15 or 16. Drat that meddlesome cub, and they weren't the likeliest nother, because the first haul was the pick of the flock. I never see a likelier lot of rats than what that first haul was. We got a splendid stock of sorted spiders and bugs and frogs and caterpillars and one thing or another, and we like to got a hornet's nest, but we didn't. The family was at home. We didn't give it right up, but stayed with them as long as we could, because we allowed we'd tire them out, or they'd got to tire us out, and they done it. Then we got alicumpain and rubbed on the places and was pretty near all right again, but couldn't set down convenient. And so we went for the snakes, and grabbed a couple of dozen garters and house snakes, and put them in a bag and put it in our room. And by that time it was supper time, and a rattling good honest day's work. And hungry? Oh, no, I reckon not. And there weren't a blessed snake up there when we went back. We didn't half-tie the sack, and they worked out somehow and left. But it didn't matter much, because they was still on the premises somewheres. So we judged we could get some of them again. No, there weren't no real scarcity of snakes about the house for a considerable spell. You'd see them dripping from the rafters and places every now and then, and they generally landed in your plate or down the back of your neck, and most of the time where you didn't want them. Well, they was handsome and striped, and there weren't no harm in a million of them, but that never made no difference to Aunt Sally. She despised snakes, be the breed what they might, and she couldn't stand them no way you could fix it. And every time one of them flopped down on her, it didn't make no difference what she was doing. She would just lay that work down and light out. I never see such a woman. And you could hear her whoop to Jericho. You couldn't get her to take a hold of one of them with the tongs. And if she turned over and found one in bed, she would scramble out and lift a howl that you would think the house was afire. She disturbed the old man so that he said he could most wish there hadn't ever been no snakes created. Why, after every last snake had been gone clear out of the house for as much as a week, Aunt Sally warn't over it yet. She warn't near over it. When she was settin' thinking about something, you could touch her on the back of her neck with a feather, and she would jump right out of her stockings. It was very curious. But Tom said all women was just so. He said they was made that way for some reason or other. We got a lickin' every time one of our snakes come in her way, and she allowed these lickings weren't nothing to what she would do if we ever loaded up the place again with them. I didn't mind the lickings, because they didn't amount to nothing, but I minded the trouble we had to lay in another lot. But we got them laid in, and all the other things, and you never see a cabin as blithesome as Jim's was when they'd all swarm out for music and go for him. Jim didn't like the spiders, and the spiders didn't like Jim, and so they'd lay for him and make it mighty warm for him. And he said that between the rats and the snakes and the grindstone, there weren't no room in bed for him scasely. And when there was, a body couldn't sleep, it was so lively, and it was always lively, he said, because they never all slept at one time, but took turn about. So when the snakes was asleep, the rats was on deck, and when the rats turned in, the snakes come on watch. So he always had one gang under him in his way, and the other gang having a circus over him. And if he got up to hunt a new place, the spiders would take a chance at him as he crossed over. He said if he ever got out this time, he wouldn't ever be a prisoner again. Not for a salary. Well, by the end of 3 weeks, everything was in pretty good shape. The shirt was sent in early, in a pie, and every time a rat bit Jim he would get up and write a little in his journal whilst the ink was fresh. The pens was made, the inscriptions and so on was all carved on the grindstone, the bed leg was sawed in two, and we had et up the sawdust, and it give us a most amazing stomach ache. We reckoned we was all going to die, but didn't. It was the most undigestible sawdust I ever see, and Tom said the same. But, as I was saying, we'd got all the work done now at last, and we was all pretty much fagged out, too, but mainly Jim. The old man had wrote a couple of times to the plantation below Orleans to come and get their runaway nigger, but hadn't got no answer, because there weren't no such plantation. So he allowed he would advertise Jim in the St. Louis and New Orleans papers, and when he mentioned the St. Louis ones, it give me the cold shivers, and I see we hadn't no time to lose. So Tom said, "Now for the anonymous letters." "What's them?" I says. "Warnings to the people that something is up. Sometimes it's done one way, sometimes another, but there's always somebody spying around that gives notice to the governor of the castle. When Louis XVI was going to light out of the Tuileries, a servant girl done it. It's a very good way, and so is the anonymous letters. We'll use them both, and it's usual for the prisoner's mother to change clothes with him, and she stays in, and he slides out in her clothes. We'll do that, too." "But look-a-here, Tom, what do we want to warn anybody for that something's up? Let them find it out for themselves. It's their lookout." "Yes, I know, but you can't depend on them. It's the way they've acted from the very start, left us to do everything. They're so confiding and mullet-headed, they don't take notice of nothing at all. So if we don't give them notice, there won't be nobody nor nothing to interfere with us, and so after all our hard work and trouble this escape'll go off perfectly flat. Won't amount to nothing. Won't be nothing to it." "Well, as for me, Tom, that's the way I'd like." "Shucks," he says, and looked disgusted. So I says, "But I ain't going to make no complaint. Any way that suits you suits me. What you going to do about the servant girl?" "You'll be her. You slide in the middle of the night and hook that yaller girl's frock." "Why, Tom, that'll make trouble next morning, because of course you probably hain't got any but that one." "I know, but you don't want it but 15 minutes to carry the anonymous letter and shove it under the front door." "All right, then, I'll do it, but I could carry it just as handy in my own togs." "You wouldn't look like a servant girl then, would you?" "No, but there won't be nobody to see what I look like anyway." "That ain't got nothing to do with it. The thing for us to do is just to do our duty, and not worry about whether anybody sees us do it or not. Hain't you got no principle at all?" "All right, I ain't saying nothing. I'm the servant girl. Who's Jim's mother?" "I'm his mother. I'll hook a gown from Aunt Sally." "Well, then, you'll have to stay in the cabin when me and Jim leaves." "Not much. I'll stuff Jim's clothes full of straw and lay it on his bed to represent his mother in disguise, and Jim will take the nigger woman's gown off of me and wear it, and we'll all evade together. When a prisoner of style escapes, it's called an evasion. It's always called so when a king escapes, for instance. And the same with a king's son. It don't make no difference whether he's a natural one or an unnatural one." So Tom, he wrote the anonymous letter, and I smouched the yaller wench's frock that night and put it on and shoved it under the front door the way Tom told me to. It said, "Beware. Trouble is brewin'. Keep a sharp lookout. Unknown friend." Next night we stuck a picture, which Tom drawed in blood, of a skull and crossbones on the front door, and next night another one of a coffin on the back door. I never see a family in such a sweat. They couldn't have been worse scared if the place had been full of ghosts laying for them behind everything and under the beds and shivering through the air. If a door banged, Aunt Sally she jumped and said ouch if anything fell. She jumped and said ouch if you happened to touch her. When she weren't noticing, she done the same. She couldn't face snow way and be satisfied, 'cause she allowed there was something behind her every time, so she was always a-whirling around sudden and saying ouch, and before she got 2/3 around she'd whirl back again and say it again, and she was afraid to go to bed, but she dasn't set up. So the thing was working very well, Tom said. He said he never seen anything work more satisfactory. He said it showed it was done right. So he said, now for the grand bulge. So the very next morning at the streak of dawn we got another letter ready and was wondering what we better do with it, because we heard them say at supper they was going to have a nigger on watch at both doors all night. Tom, he went down the lightning rod to spy around, and the nigger at the back door was asleep, and he stuck it in the back of his neck and come back. This letter said, "Don't betray me. I wish to be your friend. There's a desperate gang of cutthroats from over in the Indian Territory going to steal your runaway nigger tonight, and they have been trying to scare you so as you will stay in the house and not bother them. I am one of the gang, but have got religion, and wish to quit it and lead an honest life again, and will betray the hellish design. They will sneak down from northards along the fence at midnight exact with a false key, and go in the nigger's cabin to get him. I am to be off a piece and blow a tin horn if I see any danger, but stead of that I will baa like a sheep as soon as they get in, and not blow at all. Then whilst they are getting his chains loose, you slip there and lock them in, and can kill them at your leisure. Don't do anything but just the way I am telling you. If you do, they will suspicion something, and raise whoop jamboree hoo. I do not wish any reward, but to know I have done the right thing. Unknown friend." End of chapter 39.